Hello, Lloyd. So I picked 4 cards here. I'm going to go through various aspects of them. I believe one I will save for class or I'll do it to mine. But you're watching this either for remediation or to have a better understanding of what's expected in things to come. So we're going to get into some remediation over things that should have been done. But we're also going to get into CSS properties and how you can style things via them, as well as attributes on your element, as well as custom events. So here goes nothing. I'm going to fork Lloyd's team card here. Solid name, at least. Team card. And I'll go and fork this band one as well while we're at it. And I'll go and fork this nice card. That name does not really work. Character card and character card 2 sort of work, because it's a character card and you're supposed to have them named differently. So I'll fork all 4 of those. And then I'm going to copy this one. Get pipe, it'll let me. Clone team card, CD, team card, npm install. Tee up other windows if I want. Open up code to this while it's running in the background. Now, if we look at just team card repository, it looks good at the top level, built using OpenWC. npm type start. All right, so we got Phillies, Bryce Harper, and this would be the main reason this is pulled up. So the buttons don't work. Now, based on the way the buttons are written, I see that the buttons used to work. So let's pick this apart and make it better. So if we go into index, let's look at how this is implemented. All right, so when I say implemented, I mean you putting an instance of the card in question, right? So I get 2 of them. Nice. If I delete this UL and the image slot part, nothing changes there, but the stats are showing up there. Cool. Okay. So I put in words there for the top. Nothing gets bound. Okay. I need to clean that up for top text. And we've got this slot named image location. So looking at what's here as far as duplicate, right? So we've got a duplicate function. Then we're adding an event listener for duplicate. There's nothing wrong with doing it this way. I'm a stickler for spacing, so I space things out like that. Okay, let's see. We've got document.querySelector.duplicate, which is going to give me this class name. So the button is getting called, and then it's going to run this function. Now, especially when I got JavaScript that's not working, I usually call this up as well. So we can immediately see there is cannot read properties of null. Selecting that, it says the mouse over event for .card. Now, the reason it's doing this is .card exists, but it's down in the shadow root. And this boundary that we can see when we expand and collapse and is the guts, the inner of the card, the things that come out of the render method, you cannot query that, cannot select it in this way. Now, looking at what this mouse over is, it's just changing the background on the card. So instead of it being .card, right, because that's down inside of our element, we can now query and target our element. That's part of the whole reason for scoping it, right? So I can do team card. I'm going to do this on the mouse over and the mouse out. And as soon as I apply that, we see we still get net properties of null. Oh, there's a click details button. Details. All right. So this has to do with the same thing, right? So I can't query select down into the details in this way. Now I can do a selection for details, and then I could do, actually, let's do it this way. I could do team card dot shadow root dot query selector, because you can chain these, right? So I can get the card, then I can walk into the shadow root, and then I can query the shadow root and give me details. Now, this is still going to throw an error here. because when this code initially runs, that does not exist to supply this shadow root selector, right? And we're putting the click handler on that button, but from the high level. So we've got a scoping issue at play here. So you've got a details button. I can see it clearly works. And if I inspect, it is done using details, that's perfect. It seems like mixing some potential other solutions though. So details works off of the summary, which is the title of it, and then the slot getting rendered into the div. That part's perfect. The issue has to come down to when I hit this, I'm going to open and close. Now, if I actually take open here and I delete that, it will close it. So imagine via JavaScript, that's what we're actually trying to do. We're trying to target this details tag and more or less undo that attribute of either being open or it's not open. So the selectors in question here, even if this were working, the selectors in question are grabbing the description, right, which I don't even see that in here, so it's probably trying to mash up an old solution. So trying to get the description, which isn't going to work. So what we actually want is we don't want to apply these things to the button itself in this case. All right, so we're outside the scope. Imagine we're in indexed HTML. We're away from our card. We're trying to do things to the card, right? So generally those sorts of changes I would want to live with the card. So there's a few ways that we can handle that. I see that we're trying to change it to say hide details, show details. You could do this from outside the card, but more likely it's a better solution to do it internal to the card. All right, so while this says game stats, we're trying to override this to say hide details, show details. So what we could do instead is in the source and in team card, we do have access to all this funness. It manages this, right, and makes this toggle open and close. Now, when I just hit details, right, it's going to do that automatically. So there's nothing saying you can't add and make up whatever method you want in here. So I'm going to make one called toggle details. And toggle details. So you can see Copilot is writing code for me. I just installed GitHub Copilot. So if you can get it for free, which I'm part of a GitHub education thing, because I don't know if it's because of psu.edu, but I would recommend checking that out. Let's see if you can actually do toggle attribute. Toggle attribute DN, right? So MDN is going to be for Mozilla Developer Network. I can talk. I have learned something new. Thank you so much, robots and AI. So I was not aware that you could actually just call toggle attribute and it would kick the Boolean on and off. That's fantastic. All right, so now I don't even have to write logic in here. This is just going to modify the open status based on knowing that I wrote the word toggle. This Copilot thing is ridiculous, so you better get used to it. But you still need to know enough of the spec to be able to work with it. So when someone calls toggle details, though, it's going to query root select this, and then it's going to toggle the attribute open either on or off. Now I've got this boiled down to method that lives on here. I can call it from outside of it. So your button for change, actually you don't have a button for this. All right, I'll add a button. So button, we'll do on click equals toggle details. It just did that for me. Toggle details, and assumed I'm going to make something named that with class details. It's kind of funny, it doesn't understand the web component scoping here, but I'll go down to this part. We got details, toggle link frame. All right, so then we'll do a function called toggle details. I can type it. Toggle details. There we go. So function toggle details, and toggle details is going to do Look at all this craziness that it just tried to write for me. So it just tried to assume that I'm going to write the thing below it, which is not entirely true, but it was a decent guess. It's kind of fun to play with that. So I'm going to query select the team card, right, which is always going to give me the first one. So we're only applying this button to the first one in this case. But then I'm going to call, and it's a nice feature of VS Code. You see, it knows that I've selected team card. It knows the definition of team card. And so it actually makes suggestions about what you want to do to it, which is pretty sick. I'm going to do toggle details. So I'm calling a method on team card in this case. So now that I'm doing that, when I hit toggle details, this is the equivalent of taking that and turning it on and off. That's pretty neat. Now, let's say that I wanted to do something to this based on it being open or closed. All right, so I've got all of this replaced. Here's another clue just in general. If you're writing code and you've got a whole bunch of code to do something and it's not working, there's probably something low level like you didn't select something. There's also, we've got multiple ways of doing event handlers. So notice that I didn't actually have to do any query selector stuff to make this event handler. And it's because you've got a mix of these, which is fine, but some of these event handlers are coming from this kind of more magic on-click capability that you can use, which is sort of a legacy of JavaScript in the way that we would do it old school. This query selector for .bg color, right? So we've got, you click on it and I change the background color. Now it's trying to, again, change .card, which in this case isn't .card, it's team card. Team card. See if even just that works, right? Go. Now it's not working. Now it probably is actually working, but not doing what we would expect. And this is why. So you can see style background colors being set on the card, the whole card, but isn't what we're actually seeing rendered, right? That's not affecting the divs and things down inside of our card. So either we could do something similar to what we just did, right? Where you make up some method that's like change the color and then you do the stuff internally, or we could work on a property and reflect that property and then style based on that property changing. So this was certainly not in the initial requirements for this, but we get into CSS attribute styling as a result of this. So I'm going to keep your click handler, and this part isn't bad. But for the moment, I'm just going to comment that out. What I want to think of in this case is our scope is to change the background of this card. I'm going to make a variable up here, and we'll call it accent color. And type is string, reflect is true. Compiler is amazing. I see why people are saying this is a huge time saver. I can't, okay, get Copilot. This is ridiculous. So type string, reflect an attribute true, so or attribute with a name. So what I'm doing here is I'm creating a property, which means I'm going to be able to react to it, and it's going to have data reactivity like the rest of lit. So let's give it a initial value. So I'm going to say this dot accent color. Whoops. Accent color. Sure, we'll start with blue. That was weird. So we'll start with blue. It's going to be reflected. So this won't do anything to start. Let's just save and see what happens. So when I do reflect that and I name the attribute like this, and the reason I have to do this, in JavaScript, we camel case variables. I can't make a variable named like cool-stuff. That is not a valid variable name in JavaScript. So to bridge this difference between HTML, which doesn't allow uppercase letters, and JavaScript, which doesn't allow dashes, is we say, when you see this attribute, so when you see accent color, it's actually updating this internal value. So this allows the DOM, in this case, right, I could change it to green. If I right click, stores global value, and I push the up arrow to get access to it and do temp1 dot accent color, The property internal to this is now green. So here's how we're going to use this. We're going to do something with that reflect. So reflect is very important for styling. If I take reflect off, the value is still blue, but we don't see it reflected here. Like if I take name out, your code will still have Bryce Harper, but it doesn't actually say Bryce Harper at the top. So that's what reflect is giving us in these cases, is if the value changes internal to the element, it gets reflected back into the DOM. And what we can do on that is use that as a valid CSS selector. So let's find the background of this card, right? And the background appears to be being supplied by, make this a little smaller. The background in this case is being supplied primarily by this card. There we go. Right, so the background color, there we go. Okay, so dot card has that value. So that is the default. But what I can do is I can say, and this is only scoped inside the web component that this sort of thing works. So I can do :host. Look, it even knew what I was going to write in freaking Copilot, all right? This is the way that we can target based on an attribute being set in HTML. So when accent color is blue, I'm going to do dot card, and I'm going to make the background color blue, and blue violet, sure. And I'm going to make the color white. That way we have some contrast between it. Wow, that blue violet is special. Now, this only applies if accent color is blue. So if I take accent color and I make it like orange or something, it doesn't know what orange is. We don't match that value, and then it goes away. It's more common to see this with booleans than, full-on string names. This is not kind of the way I would generally go about changing the color of a background, but it's not terrible. So I can now apply accent color. However, accent color has to be predefined here. So you could have accent color is blue, right? And then I would do like blue, red, and green, something like that, right? And this one we'll say is green with white text, and this one is red, and this one is blue, right? And save, and then that looks awful. Now, I'm going to avoid a bucket of awful. To start, we'll just say that accent color is null. So it's null, which means it's not actually reflected here, right? There's no value. Even if I gave it a value of nothing, I believe it'll still be reflected. See, so that's how I get accent color and nothing after it. That's the difference between accent color is nothing and null is literally there is no value associated. So there is no value associated to this. It is an empty value. Now, I have this value, right, in CSS, this value I can modify as an attribute in HTML that then CSS works with to have styling implications. And so I've created myself this little pathway by which I can update the background color, right? So previously we were targeting this correctly. So instead, I will say now dot accent color equals orange. Now when I click BG color, nothing happens because it doesn't have a definition of orange, right? So this is why I generally would not do things in this way in like a production example unless I had a palette of common colors that are defined, right? So if we have someone, we want them to be able to style the background of something, I might give 12 options. 12 is pretty common, right? For 12 primary colors. So that way, if someone's putting in fuchsia, well, we don't have definitions for fuchsia, but we might for pink, we might for purple, orange, blue, green, whatever. So I'm going to make this red. Now when we change the color, it actually changes the color. Now, a lot of people put in random, let's see if I can do random item in an array. Oh, yep, that is what I wanted to do. There we go. Okay, so it suggested some code to me to give me this information at random. So this is what I wanted it to do, and this is why I think this whole augmented brain technology thing might actually be of value. So I am going to, no, I don't, okay. a little wonky in what it's trying to do. I see. It still thinks it's an autocomplete here. So I'm going to get a random color. I'm going to take my team card and move this code down. Right, so there's a random color in the array. I had red, blue, and green. Right, so red, blue, and green were defined. This is going to loop through the list of colors and give me one of these values. And now I've got a random change in color. Now I'm creating some horrific accessibility issues here, but we are just in the learning phase. So needing to rescope that code so that it's off of the query selector. And then these are a couple different ways in which we could go about implementing this. Now, another way that we might do this, and this is something that Red Hat design library goes off of, but it's common in other design libraries, is instead of saying, oh, accent color and thinking blue, orange, red, what they would do instead is say accent color or theme, and they name it something semi-nonsensical. So maybe they have 4 options, and they go with like earth, wind, fire, heart, we are Captain Planet. That's like 90s humor. You won't get it, but like look it up. What a weird show. All right, so maybe instead of this, we've got earth, wind, fire. Why I wanted to complete with water. That's awesome. All right, so now if I set this to earth, wind, fire, it is changing, but that's not going to do anything here. Then maybe internal to my element, I've got earth, and I've got fire, and I've got wind. Okay, and all right, so now we've got something that's not a color name, and it has some association. Now, there's a reason I do this, is we're going to use another way of influencing this background and design. So I'm going to do a CSS variable, and I'm going to make up the CSS variable name. Now, if you remember BEM and the BEM CSS styling naming convention, we're going to go with something sort of like that. There's CSS variables, that could be a variable. It just has to have 2 dashes in front of it. But again, like other variable names, you probably want something that actually makes sense. Now, for web components, there's no requirement to do this, but based on just a lot of conversations and sitting in on Zoom calls and things and what people that have written this for bigger libraries would go with, they might go with the name of the element hyphen the intentionality of the thing. So I'm going to go with accent color, not card, right? So team card accent color. And the way that we do a CSS variable is var, the name of the variable, and then a fallback. So if that variable is not defined, then use this. Now, there's 2 ways I could go about implementing this. I could just do copy, paste, right? And this is fire, and this one is wind. Oops, not fire and wind. This is red, and this one is blue, and we'll make earth green. Sure. Okay, so this will still work because even though these variables aren't defined, it's just falling back on the thing that is. Now, I can use a CSS variable, take this team card accent color, to do a CSS selector at the high level, right, at my application level. So now, I can set, let's see if this cascades correctly. I can set team color equal to, we'll say pink. Now it doesn't randomize anymore because I'm overriding the global value of this CSS variable. And what happens is via the cascade, that variable is globally scoped because of the way CSS works. Now, if I instead said, okay, well, it's not in the body, right? Because body is going to cascade and it's going to get my team card. If I instead said, well, only divs have that CSS variable in place, it's not going to apply. So that variable is going to follow the cascade and only be set during the cascading process. So if I set this directly on team card, I now have the ability to override this value. Now, it's kind of locked in place. I might have like 3 different colors, or the way that I might end up doing this is I do the same type of CSS selector, but on the outside of my element, right? So that accent color fire, I could say, well, team card accent color equals earth. This is weird. Now the other values still allow it, right? I can still get to those at random, but earth is pink. Right, so I can now change this for the other ones, and we'll say that instead we're going to say it's orange when we're on fire, and when wind, when it's wind, it's going to be black. Pink, there we go. Orange sometimes showing up, right? It is random. So this is making this selector at the high level, right? When this attribute is set, that's valid. I'm outside of my element. When I'm down in my element, when this value is set, apply the following to this, right? So using this, I couldn't change the color in this case. I couldn't change, I couldn't say like color and affect the text color to be red. Even if I put important on it, I don't believe. Let's verify that. There's pink, nothing turned red. So we still have the scoping, but the CSS variable is allowed to cascade through the shadow roots, which makes it very important for giving people design flexibility. So naming conventions are big. Using this ability to influence design in small ways can give people a backdoor into this approach. One area where we might end up using something like this in a real setting will be, well, I really like your card. However, the spacing around card, right, has a padding of 16 by 8. And maybe we don't want 16 by 8. Maybe we just want 16. Well, I'm stuck with your design right now. There's two ways I could solve that type of scenario. One is making a CSS variable, again, right? So we've got padding on card, and instead I can say var, and we do team hyphen card hyphen wrapper hyphen padding, right? Something that makes sense to the internal logistics of this card. And I still set that default value, even though it's a whole ton of stuff. And then I go and I hit save. And then I go up to here, the high level, and we'll say 20, sure. Team card wrapper padding is 20 pixels. Hit apply. Team card wrapper padding is 20. And it appears to have applied in a uniform manner. Now, usually the way that I illustrate these CSS variables, I make them something ridiculous. There we go. So it's obviously doing it now, right? So I could set that and have it cascade through. But then I go back to the design team and they go, oh, well, but we want the ability to not make it centered. Okay, fine. Hyphen team, hyphen card, hyphen wrapper, hyphen text, hyphen align, right? And the default value is center. Okay, and then we grab this value and I go back to here and I paste it in and I say left. Nice, now we can make it left. And then the design team comes back again and says, well, we actually, so I'm doing this on purpose. You have to supply CSS variables to target these specific things to influence them. If you don't, your design is locked in place. Now that might make sense, particularly in the case of text align. Why the hell would I want someone to be able to manipulate that? It doesn't look like the card's intention at all. It just smashes everything. So you're kind of trying to find this line between flexibility and people screwing stuff up royally. So another way that we can allow people to screw stuff up royally while still having built-in flexibility is we set things this way. Maybe we don't have the CSS variable for padding, or maybe we do and we use it multiple times so we get nice consistent padding at a ratio. But another way we can get information into, styling into the shadow root is like this. So we have class, and class is card, and card works off of here. But we have another attribute we can apply. It's called part. In part, we give it a name, and typically in industry land, if we're giving a part to something, we're naming it the same thing as what we had before. I also noticed you were missing that there, which is why your image wouldn't render. So there, fix the image. If I wanted someone to be able to target meme maker, right now they can't do that. So maybe I'd give a part equals meme-maker. Or it could just be meme in this case. These can be whatever you want. You can also have multiple. So I got a meme and web component and stuff. It could be anything. Think of it like classes. Okay. But what this allows me to do on the outside now is I could theme internally. I could say, well, instead of dot class, instead of dot card, I could do div part equals card, because it's an attribute, so I could select it that way. It's a little weird, but you could do it. The real purpose of part is so that you can write selectors like this. So it's not part, it's CSS Shadow Parts is the actual name of the spec. So I can do part. Look at this. It's writing only CSS variables. Okay, that's not what that's. All right, so a part selector is done like this. And the part I am selecting is card. And then I'm going to say margin 100 pixels. And what this does is it's a pseudo selector. That's what : implies. Sometimes you might see things that are like team card -hyphen before, right? It has a bunch of autocompletes. There are some of these. But part is going to go down into the shadow root and find where part equals card in this case. And it will apply if part has card in it. Right? If I did it to web component, right now it applied the spacing around meme. And if I similarly, instead of writing web component, wrote meme, right? It's allowing me to apply styling however I want. I can put as many things in here as I want now. I can do background color orange, which shouldn't do anything. However, when I apply padding of 50 pixels, right, we'll make margin 10. Now I'm able to apply as many of these as I want, right? So I can stack them together. So this is another way of doing styling, right? We've got CSS variables. We've got attribute-based styling. We can mix these approaches together. And then as a full-on fallback, we can always expose a part and then style directly through and apply whatever we want to it. Now, this won't keep cascading. So I couldn't go like part is card and then start to walk down, meme maker. Like this would not do the same thing as what I just wrote. So the whole point of this specification is very targeted, apply to this thing, but I don't actually know what you want to apply. It's just kind of, you can apply stuff to it. In our own projects, we'll leave this in certain design considerations where like, I just don't know how you're going to use that thing. For example, it's a button. So we've got a lot of buttons on our interfaces. Maybe you've got a button that has a slot and it has a little character in it. Well, maybe the character screws up the button and we're actually using the button because when you click, it does like this nice ripple effect or something. But the button by specification is only supposed to be 40 pixels high. Well, in this one instance, we want it to be 50 because we've got this little character in the button. It's for stuff like that. One-off, not things you're constantly doing to override. CSS variables are a lot more like, I want to change the font that's used right there. Something like that. So these are our big ways that we can style things. So generally, you're in the right neighborhood here. We've got slot image location. That's not used, which is why it doesn't show up. So if I get rid of that and I have an unnamed slot, now it will render horrifically under there. If you were trying to make this be the meme maker thing in question, which I think might have been, what we want to do instead is meme maker is its own tag. We want to pass or prop drill and send our property down into that one. So I might do like meme, right? And when you're actually doing this, it's supposed to be that the meme is on whatever the image is. I mean, this would be perfectly acceptable. But so I'm just making a variable called meme. It's not used at all. And then I'm going to do meme, and we're going to do type is string. We don't need to set attribute. We don't need it reflected. We don't care about that. And then I'm going to set this .meme equals to nothing, or actually we'll do null to start. And then where we have our meme down here, image URL you're currently setting to Bryce, I'm going to do this .meme. Now, the reason for this is while this is working, it might actually break when you go out to a web service, because when you use new URL, you don't actually, I mean, that might work. The new URL thing is for relative files relative to where we currently are. So like if you had an asset and in the assets folder, you actually had this file downloaded, this brycehr.jpg, that's where you would be doing ../asset/bryce-hr.jpg. So you don't need to do that. I actually saw that as an issue in a couple people's projects. So instead, you could just hard code this. Now, when I use the word hard code, I'm generally using it in a negative fashion, right? So this variable, while it's useful to be by reference and you did implement it correctly, your card can't be changed without it. So more likely, I would have meme, or I'd have a source or src, some variable that makes sense to you, and I would actually make it be this value, and then I would go and wire that value up, and I'd probably set a default, right, so that that is the default value, right? And then I hit save, and now when I go to implement it, I take out meme here, and I'll still end up getting the same thing, right? So my design asset is still giving defaults where someone knows what it is and it meets my purposes, but it can be repurposed to be someone else's. So if I put in, let's call it banner file, right, save, then I get my Legoland that I so love. Okay, so good job on top in getting top wired in there, right? This dot top. Now, the issue with top is, oh no, actually it is up here, sorry, my mistake. I was going to say, if this wasn't up here, it'll say ball go boom, but you then can't change the title. So changing heading, I believe, is another one. It's broken in a similar regard, but now that we have this as a variable, right, and changing heading, we're not targeting that H1 anymore. Right, so this code actually gets a lot more simplified. .h1 wouldn't work anyway. If you wanted just the tag name, it'd just be like that. So just be the H1. So team card, I can now just set top directly on here, so that now when I do change heading, it makes it Bryce Harper, right? So we're grabbing our element, we're treating it like it's a variable, and once we've query selected it, now we know the underlying class structure. We can change the values on that, and they'll get reflected. The magic of lit is how fast that happens right there, that you don't even think. You just go, oh, that's the way the web works. But it doesn't exactly work like that natively. So it's nice little glue code to make that part work so fast and be data reactive, that we say, these are the properties we care about. I then work with my code as an object. Even though it was HTML on the page, I can keep working with it as objects and then doing stuff to it. So in the right direction, that's as far as I'm going to go with that one. These. All right, so let's go check out another one here. So, and look, I learned something. Toggle attribute. Thank you, Copilot. So we're going to go to, I think, band card. Yes, so band card. So I'm going to grab band card, and I don't know if that link actually works. I was sent a link that worked, but that one is not it. Let me see. Band card Zeta. I just think it didn't update the URL. It's not just band. Oh, okay. It's band card dot for sell up. Sorry. So this is what we've got right now. I've got a band card here, and the reason that I wanted to call out this one is we've got a lot of tags here. So this is trying to break stuff out into, well, it's not just buttons. They are band taskbar, and taskbar has cards, and then there's meme maker, just to show one instance of meme maker there. And then here we've got title, and it's correctly talking to you. You can't delete it because it's the only one. I don't think background works, but I can add a whole bunch of them. And what we're doing when we add is we just add band card in here. So we can just add more band cards, and we'll get them all the way down the page. So what I wanted to look at in this is a notion of event propagation and custom events. So we're going to refactor this one slightly. If my screen will refresh, thank goodness it did. Okay, so we're going to back out of this repo, the clone this other one, git clone. Can't I have Copilot for this? It's going to be the problem. I'm not going to know what to do. All right, so yarn, I'm going to do yarn, do npm install. We've got character card 2 here, which is another one I think we'll end up looking at in class, but want to make sure that you have a git ignore file. That's why node modules is here. So whenever I download this one, and that's why part of why I won't do it right now, it'll have to actually clone the entire node modules directory, which is not good. Notice how these don't have node modules, and it's because of this git ignore. So if you need to snag this git ignore file because you copy and pasted files, that's probably the reason why that's not there, because it's a dot file, and a lot of times dot files don't show up by default on your operating system of choice. All right, so I've got band card here. Code, open that up, and then we'll do npm start. Right, so I've got this band card. Looking at this, we've got multiple elements under src. MeMaker is at the top of that, and I think there's just kind of some copy and paste going on here, copy pasta. This is clearly from somewhere else, so we'll just ignore it, but this element doesn't really seem to be correct at the moment. But what was intriguing to me about this is the relationship between taskbar and card. So opening up index.html, we can see there's meme maker. I'm actually going to take that off of mine because it doesn't do anything useful for what I'm looking at. So I've got taskbar and I've got card. And so what I wanted to do here was work on the notion of custom events. So if we look at this idea of, okay, the whole notion of this is now I can paste this and have two of them. Now, if I did add, a card gets added at the bottom. And if I do add on this one, a card gets added at the bottom. So this is pretty cool in that these things are sort of scope. Oh boy, I just killed it. And this illustrates where I was going. So even though the taskbar's buttons are compartmentalized and then they're their own styled thing, that's cool. And their functionality isn't encapsulated. So I can put a whole ton of taskbars down. That's kind of cool. And they just work, TM. So that's also cool. However, they're not scoped to be aware. So it didn't do this, you cannot delete. So let's look at what's going on here and how we could rescope this so we could get a whole bunch of taskbars with cards in them that work independently. So this might seem silly, but if you remember in a lot of the repos that you boilerplated and started out, they all have a counter and you'll just like click the button, it goes up. In a lot of other demos, you put a whole bunch of counters to illustrate that the counters are independent of each other. So let's go look at taskbar. So card. So card, to start off, right, we've got keyframes in here. So there's that crazy burst effect. Got some good CSS. Also, very simple information here. It's good. The simpler, the better. Now, paragraph text. This would be absolutely usage for a slot. So you could put paragraph text in here. Yes, but I wouldn't do paragraph text. I get rid of that. And instead, we'd use a slot for this because I don't know what that output is going to be. So I would use a slot. And then when I go to actually implement this, I could still just paste that in the middle. And I think there's something weird with when the toggle shows up for this. Yes, okay, you have to go like to a real small viewport, but there it's actually displaying the thing in question. That is obnoxious that you have to do that, but it's showing it not on mobile. You might want to change the media query. It's supposed to show all the time as opposed to just when we're on mobile. But anyway, that's using a slot. So even though this stuff isn't wrapped in like a paragraph or a div or anything, it's still going to render in the slot. It's a text node by browser definition. So if I do wrap it in a div, it's still going to work, and I could put a whole bunch of them. I could write whatever I want in here. But as simple as it is, even if you want to do perhaps bold the word post-COVID, the way that this was previously written, you are not able to do that because those variables are sanitized to not include HTML by design because they're getting passed around the internal data model of your element. So even if you want to do something like that, or maybe link to Scotia, you can't do that if it's a pure text string. So this would be another place where we want to be thinking about using a slot, is if I have any HTML implication there, where it's variable as far as my usage. So I've got one card, and we'll make another one, and we'll just delete some of the stuff to illustrate that we can get 2 cards. Details works independently of them. So they're scoped to just themselves. That's fantastic. Okay. So now we're going to go into the card. We've got that. Show details is a button when it's clicked. Now, really show details, and a couple people are still doing this. It's in the requirements to use that detail and summary tag. So I would refactor this to use the details and summary tag. It's even easier than this, and then you don't have JavaScript in the end, but I'm not going to refactor that right now. You can do that. What I wanted to do was the notion of some type of data binding going on here. So, and event management. So if we look at band taskbar, right, we've got apparently a click handler, a pointing device. I don't know, you're using an event list or binding without an expression. It's a delete card. Well, delete card is there. Or, oh, delete card doesn't actually use the E. That's interesting. So I think what this is complaining about is you're using an event listener binding without an expression. Expressionless property. View problem, no quick fixes involved. That's an interesting error to be throwing out. So the first thing I do with these, especially I paste it somewhere else to make sure it's not actually surrounding code that's causing that issue, which it appears to not be. Oh, there's what it's complaining about. Space. So I still see a lot of you getting spaces messed up, and that's, you know, to be expected at this bracket. This will still work, but it shouldn't. You should be doing it like this. However, in between attribute names or things like this, like a function, you need to have a space, right? It was just complaining about that. That would have thrown a linter nuts, and it throw you through a loop because you didn't do that. So, yay, I fixed an error. But delete card is going to go, and it's going to say document.query selector band-app last child does not equal query selector band card. So this is it saying, hey, let's make sure that there's one card. Now, what I wanted to do specifically with this was encapsulate this functionality and show how you could use this differently and not do document scoping. Anytime we're doing document scoping, that is making wide sweeping assumptions about our whole application. So we've got these buttons compartmentalized. That's awesome. Let's compartmentalize the functionality as well. So instead of doing this delete, and as you saw before, this actually was able to delete things that it's not supposed to. We're going to refactor our HTML, and we're going to do it this way. We've got slot. Nothing saying I can't render a slot within this, and the taskbar actually has these things in it. Now, taskbar might not be the best name. Given this, you might make some other element that has a taskbar. I'm not going to get into that level of detail, but if our implementation was tweaked, so let's say that we have these band cards, and they actually live within the band taskbar, and then our taskbar has a slot in it, it will render the items out. Now, this breaks our code because we are scoping things now. They're within the shadow root. They're inside of another tag, and now no longer this document query selector .band app. In this case, this add card is also assuming there's some other thing called band app. Now, many of you said, I cloned my thing, but when my clones happen, when we move to having the HTML, and it doesn't bring that along. And that's because you need to write the word true there. The clone node method says, hey, take that and copy it. But you see there's a Boolean there potentially of deep. That means a deep clone, meaning not just the item, get all the HTML in the item as well. And so if you do true there, then you will actually clone those items as well. But instead of this, right, so instead of doing a document query selector, we have to think about this a little differently. Slot is going to have those things render. So our cards will still show up. The cards, though, as placed in the page, they're no longer under the body as their primary tag of report, if you will, their parent. Their parent is now taskbar. Now, this card doesn't know anything about taskbar at the moment. I'll actually put something in about that. But we've got band card here, right? And band taskbar. So what we can do is the scoping can change to this. This is referring to this file, this class, this instance of the object. So if I do item to clone, and actually with add card, let's also get rid of this and do the same thing. This dot append child means take me and put a node inside of my HTML tag, which would be in that higher document. So if I hit save, we do add and inspect, we are actually adding cards inside of band taskbar. And by doing that now, it's a lot easier to scope and change the other aspects of this, right? So in the case of this delete, let's not do anything at first, because console, we can console.log this.inner HTML. All right, we'll just forget what the, oops, that's not the command. Someone showed me this the other day as to how I comment this out. Oh, there we go. Okay. So learn something every day. So if I hit control and then backslash, it just comments all that out at once. So let's see what happens when we do just this. So we've got delete card still turned on. All right, and then we're going to inspect, move that over there, hit console, and then when I hit delete now, right, that this has knowledge of what's inside of it. And then we can operate against that as if it's an array of items. So the way we do that is we can do this dot children. So if we say this dot children in our console log instead of getting a string, we get an HTML collection in this case, right? And you can walk through and see all the different properties about band card in this case. But so if I have this dot children, the tag that's delivering these bars can actually manage and delete and add and do things to the content within itself. And that is well scoped. So by compartmentalizing it this way, we now go, it's suggesting exactly what I was going to write. This is really freaky. All right. So if, why won't it let me accept this? Control and right arrow. I don't know why it won't let me accept that. So if this dot children dot length is greater than 1, I'm not sure why it's not letting me tab right now. It's annoying. Right, so is greater than 1. If we've got more than one child, this, I mean, it's writing it, even though it's not letting me autoplay. Dot remove child, and it's even suggesting this dot last child. So in class, when you ask how I knew to do that, I didn't. It's not letting me delete it unless it's that. Now, we could put other criteria on here because that was just child, right? There's last element child. See what that does, because I hit delete a few times and it didn't immediately delete that card. Now it deletes that card. And the reason for that is there were text nodes in there. It's going to delete those. That's why previously when you do like last item or last child here, it could grab other stuff than what you're intending. So now this is scoped as far as these events taking place. All right, so we've got our card, and our card is deleted. Let's the change background needs wired up, change title needs wired up. But now these query selectors can be moved to either be this .query selector band card, or we know there's going to be children in here, and this is, it's not a pure array, but it's sort of an array. So for not changing background, but we'll do toggle title. Instead of doing it that way, I could do 0.title. So now when we want to toggle the title, still get the same net effect, but it's scoped to us instead of these document dots, right? So document dot whatever, that's document level scope, but we're trying to make these compartmentalized things that are reused over and over and over again. So what that means is now that that is scoped internally, I will be able to, let's delete this card. I can make multiple band taskbars. Save. We're going to have to probably zoom out here so we can see it happen. Right? So now when I do add, it's just adding to that one. And when I do delete, it's just deleting from that one. And when I do add, it's adding to that one and deleting that one. And I can add just underneath each individual one. And I can do the title just of the first card within each subset of these. And I can delete those, right? And this is why component architecture is so powerful if written correctly, right? So by scoping those things within the element that's containing them, it's now able to control the children in question and ship anywhere. I can put this on any page, a little weird. In this case, I have this control bar do that, but this has other implications later on. So another interesting example there for sure. Wanted to point that one out. Now, the other little thing that I wanted to show is event propagation. I didn't actually do it with that one, but so via custom events. So we're going to use a different one. Nice work on that. I'm going to go close. All right, let's take nice card here. So if I open up nice card, I mean, it's overflowing. I don't know how nice it is. You're going to want to rename it, but it's got a lot of the things going for it. What are you doing? Yes, it blocked it, right? It's toggling details open and closed. And then we can change text. Sweet, we changed it, and we can duplicate a bunch, and we can delete a bunch. It's great. So let's take this one, and we're going to... All right. Let's clone. npm install code. Let's open that up. All right, so looking at specifically, because one of the requirements has to do with updating status, right? So I want details machine to be something more human readable instead of the word machine. And we're going to make it status driven via a custom event. So looking at nice card has a name. Name is welcome. It prints out welcome. It's got details and then opens and closes. Cool. Right. And then if we look in index, we've got meme maker. I don't know why meme maker is there. Just sitting there blank. That's not needed. But we've got the details machine button. And if we look at that, it has a click handler. Okay. Details, document.query selector, shadow root, details, right? And then it's got this get attribute. So this is how I had been writing it before, the first example here, right? So right off the bat, we can just do details dot, I think it was toggle attribute is what it said. Yeah, toggle attribute. Oops, and I got to write the name of the attribute, open, right? So open. Right there, we've got a refactor that drops 6 lines before we even start. So the other thing that that I want to do is I want to not just toggle this, but I want to know when it's toggled. And I want to know on the page as a whole when it's toggled. Now, not just when it's turned on and off. So to see what I'm talking about here. We're going to get into concepts throughout the semester called state management. And I am a huge stickler for state management. The things that I do with the Hacks authoring system would not be possible if I were not. So what state management is the notion that when I click that, it opens, right? Open, close interaction, cool. And then I hit details, open, close interaction. But pure state management would be that there is a way of influencing this card without doing all of that craziness as far as clicking to change, some random shadow root attribute. So the first part of it is pegging whatever the state or states of our card, and there's not a lot of states to this. It's just kind of open and close at the moment. But your states could be things like hovered. It could be that it's opened. Could be raised, like if you got a card, when you hover it, it raises off the interface via drop shadow. Maybe that state is raised. Now, again, these are just with cards. When we get into more advanced examples, like you have search and you click, right? There's different states associated with what you're searching, things like that. So the state for this is going to be whether it's opened or closed. So I want to be able to update a variable such that I'm not doing this shadow root gobbledygook. And the reason I want to do this is if this card changes, if its shadow root is modified and you later change the design and details is not the thing that's selectable, this implementation breaks. So that's what we're trying to fix. We want this to work regardless of the internal changes that happen. So this is kind of the abstraction of the data model and the state of the thing from the design of the thing, from the CSS and the HTML. The CSS and HTML, we've got abstracted from each other. But right now, we're relying on HTML structure to dictate whether or not this thing can be opened. So what I want to do is be able to put down a card and say opened. I can't do that right now. And so I can't actually put it in that state. I have to do some magic selector in order to achieve that. So right now, if I put two of these down, one's closed, this one's closed. So I'm going to first make a property that's reflected to the attribute opened so that we can at least get in the neighborhood of what that is. So I'm going to go to my card. I'm going to say this dot opened is false because we want it to be closed by default. Go up through the CSS and collapse that. Okay, I'm going to add opened here. Yes, Boolean. I'm going to reflect true on that. And I don't have to say it's what the attribute is in this case, because if it doesn't have the camel casing, then it'll work. For example, though, this, which I assume is misspelled title, if I wanted to set title in the HTML, I would have to do an attribute. I would have to say, I don't know why it's not letting me accept those. There we go. Right, title hyphen welcome. I don't need to do that for open because it is opened. That's what the variable will automatically be. So I've created a Boolean variable and it's false to start. And this bridge between these two things is smart enough to know that if I've written opened in here, right? So I put opened on my card. So if I store it as a global variable and then I do dot opened, it's not the string opened, it's true. Right? That way I can do truthy falsy sorts of things to it. So going back here, we've got opened, right? And now I want to peg this to details. So details are also supposed to have a summary. To see more, thank you for the suggestion, Copilot. So space that out. Okay, so the way I do this is I can actually do that prop drilling in a way that talks to the HTML tag itself. So on the HTML tag, when I click it, it toggles opened, right? So if we go and look at this and we inspect our source and we've got details, right? If I go to this and I click it, it says open, right? And if I take open off, then it closes it. I'm going with opened in the past tense. You can make it whatever makes sense to you. I have to do a slightly different way of assigning this variable. Now, on other ones, right, with like top text and things, this should be written more like this, right? To have some variable. We're prop drilling, we're sending it down, and now meme maker does what it wants. This is the same idea, but this is this special operator in lit, and I don't like using non-vanilla special conventions, but you kind of need one for this, unfortunately. So details is saying when opened changes, which is a property, map it to the open attribute. So we're going to get data binding now that whenever opened changes its state, it's going to change the state in details. And so just by getting that part rigged up, if the default is open, and I'm actually going to adjust the size of this because this is annoying the hell out of me. So card is not going to have overflow, or no, it's not going to have a height. There we go. All right. So if I take height off on card, then I'll be able to see this because this is driving me nuts. Height. Now, right, this one is opened and this one is closed. And if I inspect this, you can say details machine, and it opens this. However, it didn't change the value. So I can do opened, and it's opened, but then if I get rid of opened, it closes it. Even though I screwed up the state, and this is where we get into state management being a stickler. I don't want to manipulate my design manually. I don't want to go down and modify this thing. I want to modify a property and have the property modify the thing. So when we're passing information down, it's part of prop drilling, right? We're taking a property and we're reflecting it down, and it's reflecting down and it cascades through things. We don't want to just magically target something and have it do something for us. So I've got opened, it's reflected on this card, and I can sit there and I can turn it on and off. And so now, because I've got an attribute to do that, I don't have to do this details weird selection stuff anymore. I can do dot open equals, and in order to do a toggle, let's do it this way. Weird. Like that. We'll hit save. And now it toggles it open and close. And you might say, why the heck did it do that? So let's break this down even more. Let's do const card equals, okay? And then we will say opened is equal to not opened. Now the fun with a Boolean value is you can effectively flip them between true and false in this way. So if the card is opened by default, that will be 1. Not, so then it says card dot opened equals not 1, which is 0. But if it's 0, give me not 0. So it takes that false value, and if you say false of a false, you get a true value. And if you say false of a true, you get a false value. And you're able to basically flip this back and forth as a result. So the other nice thing with this, and this is where I say stickler for state management, if I then take the cards I have in the page, and we don't start it at open, or don't start it closed, we start it at open, it's open by default, and then when we hit details, it's closed. So we get that nice, pure interaction between these. Now, this was all set up for something called custom events. Because part of what I want you to do is this shouldn't say details machine. This should be a button that is aware of the state of this and changes based on that. So that when I click here, it's still going to have to be kept in sync with this. See, if I click this, there's an issue right now. Right? I can actually set it out of sync from where it is. If I close it, see, I clicked, it didn't do anything. So that is a state management problem, right? The user is able to interact with our item and do something, and it's out of sync with our data model. And the way that we can correct that is in 2 parts. So in one, we're going to have to pay attention to that thing changing. Now, the way that I figure out how to pay attention to that thing changing is I do some Mozilla Developer Network searching. Okay, so I say details tag MDN, right? Detail, disclosure element. And the thing I'm looking for here is events. In this article, events. So this says that there is a toggle event in the addition to the usual event supported by HTML. The details element supports the toggle event, which is dispatched to the details element whenever its state changes between opened and closed. It is sent after the state is changed, although if the state changes multiple times before the browser can dispatch the event, they are sent in one event, so the result. So we see an example here. We can actually listen for the toggle event, and we then have access to a function which is knowing about this details tag and knowing whether or not we're open or closed. So similar to the click event. Why this is different though is I clicked on details and it changed it. So I could actually, we can look at this in 2 different ways. So So I'm going to say at toggle equals this dot toggle event. And we'll also do at click equals this dot click event. So we can see the difference between these. So I can then write a toggle event on here. And let's just do console.log key. And we'll do console.log this.open. So we'll see if that changes whenever I toggle, right? And then the click, we'll do a similar sort of experiment here. Click event. All right. So, and at this, a lot of you have this in other things, but if you haven't implemented one of these yet, instead of doing this .shadowroot.query selector, targeting an item and adding an event listener for click, this is a shorthand for doing this in lit. Now, again, I'm not a huge fan of using non-vanilla techniques unless it's very easy to read and you're gaining, something in that readability. So at toggle is not a thing. It's a lit convention in which it's basically applying a toggle event listener. So imagine I wrote this .shadowroot.query selector details .add event listener toggle, and then I made it point to this event. That is what this shorthand is giving us. It's much more readable in my opinion. The at in this case, right? I've seen at click in some other examples, but that is the event name, is the click part. That'll be important. So let's see what happens when we just do that part. So I've got part pulled up, I've got console, we've already gotten something. An event has already fired. And that's because toggle fires when that variable gets bound down into it. So if I hit details, that is influencing the toggle event. And I can listen for toggle on this tag. That's different than if I click. I actually get two different events when I click. Right? So I go to click the item, and we can see that this is false. It's not open. And then we've got the toggle, and you can see it's not open. However, it's friggin' open right now. So it has to do with when those events are sent, right? So we can see a pointer event, and you can really dig into that and see that its target is the card, that this event of clicking came from the card. And I can see that there's an event for toggle, and it's telling me not a whole lot, to be perfectly honest, but saying the return value, which hopefully is relevant. So let's close this. Return value. Nope, that's just saying that it has a return value. Current target. Doesn't seem to be anything useful in here. And in fact, in the example, it didn't actually send this information to me. It just said, well, just ask what the value is. So if I open this, or if I do my truth false, right, I'm getting out of sync. This is what I'm trying to illustrate. When I click this, it's not actually changing the value. See how it's true? But if I hit this to make it false, nothing just happened right now. If I hit it again, it'll open, right? True, false. We see it go true, false. Now I'll close it and then I'll open this. It's still false though. So we're able to listen for this event. We're able to listen for clicking, but also for the toggle happening at all, right? Because it's a click. Like if I hold the mouse down, and you can't see it, but there's an event for clicking. And then when I release, that is actually taking place. So what we can do to try and get these in sync is, if you click on the card, perhaps I need to see what the attribute is for open and set opened accordingly. Or we can do it on the toggle event. And we can see, okay, well, you toggled this. Is it opened? And if it's opened and doesn't currently match this .opened, then this .opened damn well better match what that thing is. So I don't have a super big preference on this. Another interesting thing to note with the click of handler, if I tab, which is what I just did, and I hit spacebar, that is also going to generate the pointer event of clicking. Since a click isn't possible if you're just using the keyboard, like if you're an unsighted user, or maybe you're on a phone and you tap. A tap is a different event, but it will also trigger click. So instead of toggle, and we'll actually know if it's in sync from this, let's take click, right? And we'll say when you click on it, that's going to have to manipulate open. So this dot open is going to have to equal not this dot open, whatever it is. So if the user just goes and they toggle state, I should be able to get the value in sync. And if I am just listening, let's get toggle event out of there. Right, so we're going to listen on toggle event, but click event is going to change the state internal to our element to match, is the hope. We'll also learn if click event fires before or after toggle event, but I think it's before. So, right, so if I inspect this in the console, right, we're true, false, true. Now when I click this, which should say false, but it didn't close. Right, so we're still getting slightly out of sync here, right? So it's open, I should be able to click it. It says false, but it's not rendering it as false presently. If we go and inspect, we'll see open is still set, even though this isn't on here. So we might want to go and use the toggle event instead of the click event here. Not positive. Actually kind of learning as I go here. So toggle event. And I think what I want to do on the toggle event is not, oh, would I do it that way? I think on the toggle event, what I want to do is say, I want to actually query this and ensure they are absolutely kept in sync. So I'm going to do this dot shadow root, which means querying the render here. This is the shadow root. So I can do a query selection in there. Dot query selector. I'm going to do details. I'm going to get attribute open. We're going to console log the two of these. All right. Now, what we're also going to say is we're going to always defer to details. We're going to say that whatever that state is, that's what our card has to be in. Because if that thing is closed, the card cannot be in state open. So let's look at what open is when I get an attribute here, just to be sure we've got the right data type. Right, so we've got true and nothing. Oh boy. And now we've got false and null. And now we've got true and nothing. And then I click this, I've got false and nothing. And I click this. All right. Now, this is where the difference between attributes and and properties. Why this is going between nothing and null is when I click this and it expands, open right now is set to nothing. It's not wrong. And when it goes away, it's null. It doesn't exist. So I have to do a little bit of a change here to this value, right? So let's do const state equals. So if open equals nothing, then we're true. True. Otherwise, we're false. And now let's console log state. If we're literally equal to nothing, that means it has a value of some kind. So inspect console true, false, right? And it should oscillate between those two at least. Okay, so now we're just getting true and false values. It's also not the word true or word false because it's not in red. So if I wrote like this, right, that's how you can tell something's a string in the console versus these are in blue. That implies that they are Boolean values. So I've got state, and what we're going to say is this dot opened equals state. So regardless, and we'll get rid of this click event. I don't care about the click event, right? Whenever we toggle, no matter how it's done, we are guaranteeing that the state of what's on the page is what is reflected in our element, hopefully. So if I hit details, it's closed, opened, and then if I click this, it closes it, and I should click this and it should open on the very first click. right? And now let's console log opened, not state, just so that we're aware. I'm going to get rid of quick command event handler again. Okay, save. And now it's true. I click this, it's false. I click this, it's true. I click it again, it's false. I click this, it's true. We have unified state management. Now, because this is unified, we know that when the card is true, that thing is going to take place. So now I can go up here to my card. I can delete opened and it'll show that, or I can open it and it'll do it, no matter how many times I go and do that. That little teeny tiny thing is really critical as far as state management, and knowing a value is what it reports to be and that the thing is in the position that you want it to be, right? You don't want to get into the initial part where I've got it out of sync with the DOM, even in the shadow root. So now the last thing I want to do is I want to make a custom event whenever we've changed toggle. Now I know that the data model is correct. No matter what I do, toggle is going to be open or closed correctly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to implement a hook. It's in the documentation for lit. Should be on that lit website. You are auto completing this whole thing, Copilot. Okay, so updated, and the updated lifecycle is going to run anytime a variable that's in properties changes. So I'm not focusing on the styling of all of this, right? Anything that you declare in properties, the updated lifecycle is going to get a value when that modifies. So I'm going to save its little initial CodePen example. We can see under console, right? So this claimed that the name variable changed, open changed, name variable changed, open changed, because I got 2 instances of this. So let's delete that other one, right? So whenever I change details, right, opened change, the old value is true, implying that I can query the new value and it's false, right? So you can detect when things go from true to false or false to true using this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say, so it's a weird, kind of weird looking, but it's a array of objects. So you loop through the array, and the first value is the previous value of what you're looking at, and then property name. And then what you can do with property name is even suggesting what I'm about to do. So if prop name equals open, right, just show me open changing. What I want to do instead is I want to do a custom event. And so if we look at Mozilla Docs, or we're going to search for custom events MDN. A custom event allows me to make up whatever event name I want. And so I can send events, just like how there was toggle and how there's a click event. You can make up events for whatever thing you want to do. So see in this example, like animal found, you could have a custom event for animal found. And it could include whatever data you want. It doesn't have to be just click events. This could be a composite of things, like when this value changes, I want an event to be emitted. So there's different things you can read in here about what goes on an event, but I'm going to make a pretty standard way that I do custom events. So I'm going to say this dot dispatch event, and it's going to autocomplete open change. Now there's nothing saying I actually name it open changed. I'm going to space this out so it's more readable. So we've got open changed, which is taking an object. That object has detail, and detail then includes a value that we're sending, which in this case is the value of open. So this is this weird syntax here is the equivalent of writing this dot opened. I could treat everything on it as a variable. So this prop name. So this is the equivalent of saying whatever the value of this dot opened is, we're going to dispatch a custom event. Now I'm going to add some stuff to it. I'm going to do composed. I'm going to do bubbles, and I'm going to do cancelable false. So these are the 3 prime. I'm going to space this a little better. Okay. These are the 3 primary things that we will see when doing a custom event. Composed means this event occurred in a shadow root, but I want it to bubble up and go break through the shadow root barrier. Remember, shadow roots are compartmentalizing and encapsulating our code. So this property allows us to say open changed will go up through the page. All right, so we've got the DOM and the DOM tree, making the meshes large here, right? So we've got the DOM tree here. That event is going to come up through the page, right? So if our tag is down here, right, and the body tag is up here, bubbles means that this event, when it takes place, is going to go up through the div, and then it's going to go up through the body and the other tags above it, all the way up until it hits the window of the page. So what canceled means is if you say cancelable false, that means that these other tags above you, when they can listen for this event, much like how we listen for toggle. But if you say cancelable true, this element right here, that's a div maybe, it could say, oh, I got it. That was what I wanted. And then nobody else can listen to this event. So if you don't have cancelable on, that event is going to go all the way up to the top of the page. And there can be reasons why you might not want to do that. Imagine you have a whole bunch of collapsed field sets and you click the button to open one. You don't want everything above it to be aware that that just opened and then all of those open. So there are some edge cases as to when you want to set that. But generally, I don't really care if people cancel the event. So what we've got here then, right, is compose that'll go out of shadow roots, and bubbles, meaning the event will go up and keep going up. This is a pretty common way of dispatching event. Now, there's no required naming convention for event names, but this is kind of where people have generally fallen on as far as simple naming convention. Name of the variable hyphen changed, right? So that value changed in some way. I could name this like cats are cool, right? But that doesn't mean anything. So open changed, it could just be opened, right? Because the browser spec did toggle and that, was related to open, right? But that gets a little wishy-washy. So if we have opened here, right, and open changed, what's happening is this element, right, our card, whenever open changes, it's going to fire an event up, almost like our click button. Like when we click, something happens and a click event goes through the page. Well, we can fire our own custom events through the page as well. So whenever open changes, an event that can be listened to is going to fire all the way up to the top of the document for opened being changed. So I'm going to copy opened hyphen changed. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to a window. We'll do it all the way up on the top, or I could do document.body. Sure. Document.body. There's not a ton of good reason to do one over the other, to be perfectly honest. But right, so I'm going to do opened changed and e.target. You should get the details of it and where it came from. Two primary things you care about with this. So we'll go back to our card. Okay. And I'm going to toggle this, but I'm going to get something that says open changed, right? Now that state management was really important early on, because now if I click this, opened has changed, and now I'm still getting an event firing up. And the reason I know I'm getting an event firing up is I'm listening for open changed on the whole document. So the whole document is currently listening for open changed. The event starts here and bubbles up through the tags of the page, right? So it starts here, goes up to meow, goes up to body, goes all the way up to window. But when it hits body, we're listening for that event. And then we can respond to that. So I know that open changed and it has a value of true. Or I hit it again and the value that comes up is false. And then it's also giving me a reference of what emitted this, because if I click the other one, right, I can be aware that the event actually came from that second one instead of the first one. So I've got open changed. I've got open changed. And the thing that tells me where it came from is that e.target. So when open changed has happened in any regard, whether it's via events or whatever, we're going to modify this details button. I'm going to say dot whoops, document.query selector dot details button dot inner text equals I've already got it written correctly. This is so friggin' cool. I'm not gonna lie. It's not actually e.detail, e.detail.value, but that was pretty close. So my button says details machine. Oh, maybe that's not correct. Details button. All right, e.detail.value, I believe, right? Console.log. I don't know if you can actually set inner text. I think you can set inner text. I think it's mad about that. Expected end of input. Ooh, that or I am forgetting a semicolon somewhere. So there's something complaining about an error right there. I accidentally deleted something. Oh, that's it. Copy and pasted something improperly down here. It appears. Hold on. Right there, we got this dot. Oh yeah. This is okay. Opened. There we go. Switch on the page. Now I click this. Hide details. Open show details. Right. So I refresh. That first event fires, and now I actually think these are. I think it's supposed to be. I think the button is out of sync, to be perfectly honest. Mostly, well, actually, I know why that's happening. So I'm not going to fix that, but the reason the button is wrong at first is because I have multiple cards to start, right? So hide, if I refresh now, hide details, right? Because it's open. Show details, which will show it. But if I click down here, it's also emitting the event to the top of the document and still making the change. Right, so that custom event is important because then I could start to make this have a lot more internal logic to it, and it can affect a lot more parts of my application, right? If other things need to respond to this, right? Perhaps you click to expand this and there's search results. You could be listening, and the card is a design asset that just knows that it opens and closes, but the application knows that card opened, and in our application we use that card to display search results. So go fetch and get new search results and render them there using the slot to place them in the correct location. So using these things correctly, we can get pure design assets that we leverage over and over and over again and build increasingly more complex applications because of that logic that we do have going on there. Now, another way that I could have blocked for that, I said there were 2 events, right? I could say, something like some of the prior examples where like e.target equals document.query selector. Of course, why wouldn't it know that? Right, so now even if I have multiples, it's still only responding to the events for the first one. So see how that says show details? If I go down here and I click, it's not influencing that one. Right, so I can use scoping in that way to make sure I'm just doing a one-to-one with the thing that I care about. We can do a similar thing with text change, right? I could have an event bubble up that the text was changed. You can do it with anything going forward. So that is showing a lot of different ways you could apply CSS, a lot of intricacies of state management and where I want you to get to with your cards, right? Where your cards are clicking and we're expanding and it's actually pegged to this changing appropriately. Oh, I made it angry before. Oh, I know I made it angry because I modified that label directly. Yes. Okay. So I will see you in class. We'll get to work through some of these. I'll show some more examples of this. This is most of what's required for your card to be turned in for project 1. So I will see you there. We'll go through a little bit in class as far as showing some CSS stuff.